Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar of 2024. As many of you are still coming into the room to join, this is all good. I will introduce myself. My name is Lisa Chamet. I'm the head of partnerships at Charity Digital. I've been here for a few years now, so some of you might be familiar with seeing me. And I'm going to be your host for today's session. So very warm welcome to you. If you are joining us for the first time, we really hope that you will enjoy this webinar. And if you are regulars, well, it's good to have you back. We have quite a few webinars over the next couple of weeks and months that we hope will be of interest to all of you. So I can see that people are slowly joining in, as obviously is still 12:57. But as we are now joining a little bit, I will start and go with a few of more information about today's session. So today's session is sponsored by Public Interest Registry, PIR.org. It's actually the organization that looks after the .org domain name globally. With them, we'll be exploring the core trends for digital fundraising in 2024 to help charities stay ahead of the curve and boost their funds for the coming year. The session is going to be delivered by Vinita Srivastava, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at PIR. And the session is going to cover a few points. So obviously, the fundraising lessons that we've learned in 2023, and there've been quite a lot. What is new for digital fundraising in 2024, as well as several trends, including social media trends, gaming for good, so much more. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of talk around AI and around what social media platform to sort of use. So we'll go into that. But obviously, just before I want to hand over to Vinita, I'd love to know where you all are joining us from today. So if you can pop that in the chat section, that'd be brilliant. I'm currently in Kent, so working from home in the northern part of Kent near a city called Sittingbourne. Yeah, the weather is okay-ish. I'm really hoping that my internet is going to be okay today. I've had a few issues this morning, but hopefully that will be all cleared. And yeah, it'd be lovely to see where people are joining us. Let's have a look if we're seeing anybody. Obviously we have Vinita, who's actually going to be joining us from the US. So it's quite early for Vinita. But in any case, whilst we're getting closer to 1 p.m., just a few house rules and pointers for today's session before we start. So the session is being recorded. So we will upload the recording to watch on demand within a week's time. The slides, the other links and resources will also be made available to you by the end of the day. So don't worry if you've missed anything. During the webinar, please ask loads of questions, and that will be in the Q&A section of Zoom that for Vinita to access at the end. So I'll be reading out all the questions. And we'll provide about 10 minutes to answer all of your questions, put through as many as possible. And in the chat section, which is the just one speech bubble, it's for everything else, for telling us where you are joining us from, for telling us what you have tried in terms of digital fundraising strategy last year, and now what you're going to do this year. So it would be great to hear more about that. And if there's any particular questions in the Q&A that you would like answered, it's also possible to upvote them. Finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please let us know in the chat. and we'll do our very best to get the session back to normal as soon as possible. I can see that, oh yeah, actually, sorry, the chat is disabled. So I'm very sorry about that, but the Q&A section is not disabled. So you are very, very welcome to ask all of your questions at the moment. And now, without further ado, let me hand over and welcome Vinita for her presentation. Hi, Vinita. Good morning.
Good morning, Lisa, and good afternoon and good evening, depending on from where you're joining us. Thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm super happy to be here. It is early, but that's okay. I've had my coffee and all is well. So I'm going to go ahead and begin the presentation for today. Lisa gave a great introduction in terms of talking about trends in digital fundraising. So screen is clear, everyone can see it. So before we get into the exciting stuff, we'll cover some of the boring stuff and tell you a little bit about me. So I am Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Public Interest Registry. My background is in technology product management. So I love talking about technology and how it can help solve problems and sometimes create them. I think we've seen all parts of that, but I bring a product lens to a lot of the things that I look at, and I am super excited to be here at Public Interest Registry. It's been about a year and some change, time flies. And what do we do? So Lisa gave a great intro, but Public Interest Registry, we are the people behind .org. So we not only have .org, we have .charity, .ngo, .giving, .gives, .foundation, and we pride ourselves on operating one of the largest generic top-level domains. We have more than 10.8 million, so I'll just round it up to 11 domain names registered worldwide. And our primary objective is to make sure that we operate a clean domain namespace. So we are fixated on prioritizing safety, security, and quality. And we have, as mentioned, our family of domains. So outside of .org, we have .charity, .foundation, .giving, .ngo. And our goal is to provide a global platform for organizations and associations, clubs, businesses, individuals to bring their ideas to life. And the best part of that is when we hear that, oh, well, we know if it's a .org or a .ngo or a .charity that it's trusted. And we work really, really hard to ensure that the internet is a safe, happy space that can help organizations like all of yours deliver impact back to the community. So that's a little bit about Public Interest Registry and myself. We're going to jump in next to talking about the charity sector in 2024. So we have seen, and I don't think this is new for any one of us here, but it's been a very difficult handful of years, I think, with a lot of changes, a lot of global issues that are happening that are really impacting everyone, which has created a cost of living crisis, right? And I think we all feel it. I have a little bit of horror every time I go to the grocery store and I'm like, wait, this used to be $5, now it's like 15. That is, I think, impacting all of us. So that cost of living crisis is providing constraints on disposable income. And we're seeing what is resulting in a cost of giving crisis, where we're seeing that our donors and our constituents are unable to give as much as they maybe have in previous times. And this isn't really anything new, I would say, over the last handful of years. We've, survived the pandemic. We've had supply chain issues, a bunch of different things. And that has really resulted and forced organizations and charities within the sector to be very adaptable. So we've seen really great movement in terms of resiliency and finding solutions, looking at innovative ways to think about their giving programs. And that is, going to drive and continue to be a really predominant theme in 2024. So we look at the charity sector in 2024 to be really focused on recovery. I think we're all still trying to find our footing. We've had more incidences happen globally that are impacting all of us, but we're also looking towards innovation, right? How do we begin to find and think about different things uh, to start pulling more impact out of our fundraisers activities, and then also flexibility. So I think the sector has already shown that, especially with things like the pandemic, where they've had to just think and be creative, work with even less resources. But we're going to continue to see that being almost a requirement of being successful, within this sector. So what does that actually mean and how does that inform our trends? So all of these components of just kind of the environment of what we're seeing is going to result what we believe into, four kind of distinct things that we're going to talk about today. So one, charities will benefit from exploring different types of giving. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. There is big changes in the social media world, and I think there's an opportunity here to start looking at the platforms that you're on and potentially adjusting approaches. And we're going to get into the reasons why for that. And also, it's hard to have a conversation today without AI, but there are new novel technologies that there are various appetites for the use of it, but we do see some beneficial use cases. So we're going to talk about that. And then lastly, gaming for good. So what was probably a little more experimental and new has gotten a ton of traction, and it is the time for your charity, no matter the size, to begin to dabble into some of the gaming fundraising that we're seeing be so super successful. So we're going to start digging into those topics. So the first thing on looking at different ways to give. So the concept of flexible giving, before we get into this, it is the way to address the intersection of the cost of living and cost of giving crises. So as I said, we are facing constraints on our disposable income, right? The contributing factors to this, I think we all know the situation in the Middle East. We have challenges around Brexit. There's both national and international incidences that are causing things to just be more expensive. There's supply chain issues. Some of the more recent news around the shipping challenges within the Middle East going through the Red Sea, it's all affecting how much things cost. And as we are paying more for simple basics, from energy to food to, fuel is one of those, gasoline, it's all providing, our salaries are not going up they're barely increasing by inflation. So that's reducing the amount of disposable income that we have and donors have to contribute to causes that they care about. So that is one side of it. And knowing that that isn't necessarily going to change, we have seen studies where the Charities Aid Foundation, for example, has reported that 90% of charities are concerned about the rising cost of living, and 60% are concerned about their donors' ability to donate. And this is having a compounding impact because the cost of living crises are also impacting the services that some of these charities would provide, right? It's increasing the demand for it. So if food is getting more expensive and more families are unable to afford the basics, they need more support from charitable organizations that provide food relief or pantries or whatever, what have you, within their communities. So there is an ongoing kind of intersection between the price of things and our ability to give. So what can you do about it? This concept of flexible giving is something that really just means that you can easily empower your donor to change the cadence at which they give and the amount of what they can contribute based on their personal situations. Many charitable organizations will have set amounts as being the only option. And sometimes that doesn't work there. And that may work conversely too, right? If people are seeing that there is more flexibility in their budgets month to month, they might be able to give a little bit more. And maybe there's a time period where there's more constrained and that this will allow them to give a little bit less. This doesn't necessarily have to be a big technology lift for a organization. There are, widgets and buttons and, lots of products out in the marketplace that you can easily implement that will give your donors flexibility. And if that isn't always an option, there are just platforms that exist like Toucan or flexible giving accounts that will allow people to adjust the cadence and amount that they're giving. And I think the thing to remember here is that when you don't have a flexible giving option and you have a constraint, an income constraint that has come up, it's a very clear option that if I can only give a fixed amount, then I won't give it all, right? Versus saying I could decrease my contribution and you don't have to go through the steps of that cost of acquisition of that donor again, right? You're not going to lose them, but you're able to adjust, help them adjust their contributions based on what they're facing. And the data supports it. PayPoint reports that 64% of regular donors would welcome the flexibility to change their donation amount and the frequency of donation. So this is one thing to consider to help provide the flexibility to your constituents as you look into modifying or thinking through a flexible giving option. So the next thing that we would believe it's beneficial to consider is this concept of inverse giving. So this is a little bit different. It might feel a little counterintuitive, but we're going to talk through some use cases here. But inverse giving basically has two, there are two parts to it. So one, you're going to see when we have seen that when supporters donate to, you'll see an increase of donations sometimes when you see negative headlines. So the old adage of there's no such thing as bad press often applies here. It is a phenomenon that people tie to this concept of as you're getting press and you're seeing things come out where sometimes there are political alignments to things that are happening. So one example that Lisa and I talked about was with the RNLI, so the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. So we'll get into that in a minute. But if you're seeing some of these press and some of these headlines coming out against a cause or against some of the things that are part of your mission, there are opportunities to tie your communications as long as it's in alignment with where you sit to some of these current events that will result in an increased amount of donations. So the RNLI, for example, was a case that had come up where net of net, they had received a lot of negative press about the work that they did, which was basically to operate water support activities. And they were by default doing a lot of water rescues around an immigrant or migrant population. So there were statements made about, they're basically supporting certain immigration policies by doing this. And it gave them an opportunity to come out and talk about their mission. And while they received a lot of negative press, it actually resulted in I think it was they raised 200 pounds in 24 hours. I'm sure Lisa can keep me honest here, which is, a tremendous amount of money that will really help who would have thought, right? Like you're kind of dealing and seeing this negative press, negative headlines about your mission, but you're able to be able to message and work with that to your advantage. Uh, Hi,
Really
Lisa.
sorry, hi.
Yeah.
Sorry very to interrupt. Would it be possible to put your slides in full screen mode so that
Oh
it's
my gosh,
more
absolutely. I'm so sorry. Then I don't get
not
to
to
see you,
worry.
but thank you. Let
Yeah.
me get into that.
So yeah, so it's at the bottom, yeah, or make screen.
I'm just gonna do
And
presenter
also
view.
for
Does that work?
every
Is that
no,
no?
I don't think that will be the one. I think the last mode that you had was I think the best one, or perhaps at the bottom here.
All right.
Um,
Let me try this again. Sorry, team.
In the meantime, also something that I wanted to share with everyone. Obviously, the chat section is now open, and there's also possibility to turn on live captions. So you will see at the bottom of your screen, it's called show caption, a little CC icon. So you'll be able to turn that on in order to follow Benita's presentation and have it in written format. So when it comes to sharing the slides, let's have a look. It's loading for us. Yes, brilliant.
Now, okay.
Absolutely brilliant. Yes, thank you
Okay.
very much.
I'm so sorry, but thank you for
Sorry at
popping
all.
on. I thought you were gonna, give some color on the RNLI, which was a fascinating learning for me.
So,
So
exactly. I'll disappear now.
okay. Apologies. So yes, back to where we were on inverse giving. So this on the RNLI was a pretty substantial event for them, where they kind of, on some level, I guess, made lemonade out of lemons. There was also another case in the UK where there was a healthcare charity that had ended up hiring a CEO that was transgendered, and there was a lot of negative press about that type of activity. So they were also able to work through that to use that for their advantage and get a lot of uh, press opportunities to talk about their mission, and had some good traction in the transgender community. So, what you can take away from this is understand we've seen statistics where 1 out of 5 people will actually donate to a charity after bad press. So it is a little interesting. So don't always shy away from that, and look for those opportunities to tie your communications to headlines. So of course, you have to be mindful that the alignment and your mission and your voice are all within bounds of what you're trying to say. But that is something that you can look at. And the other part of inverse giving, which also ties back to what we were talking about, the impacts of the cost of living crisis on your organization. We've also seen that people relate to that because they can understand financial struggles and pressures because they're also facing them. So we've seen organizations that have been charities that have been able to be transparent about their struggles and how, some of these global issues are impacting them and their ability to provide services and raise funds. It resonates and it strikes a chord with the donor population. And we've also seen increases in giving based on being able to relate to what you're going through. So there's an opportunity here to be transparent. I think some of the challenges are, around the headlines and the negative press about issues. How do you align or stand for something without kind of going too far into political alignment, because that can be, a little tricky, but look for those opportunities. And we've seen in motivations for giving, there's a survey that was done here by Enthuse last year. So we know that 70% of people give to support a friend or family member or colleague. 28% give to a solidarity with a cause or an issue, but there's a 27% report here of people that give for inverse giving. So it is not a small percentage. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind as you look at understanding different ways of giving and how can you potentially modify your approaches to either offer options for flexible giving or start finding those opportunities where you can align to inverse giving. So moving on to the second trend that we're seeing around social media. So, there's a lot to say here, but, in previous years, there was a lot of conversation about how charities needed to go to social media platforms to find where their demographic would be. And we had, Facebook and Twitter as now X as, kind of those original behemoths of finding eyeballs and supporters and views of content related to what you're trying to do. And now social media has, really changed in a lot of ways. I think that we don't have to get too deeply into the challenges around X and some of the places that are turning into uh, pretty divisive communities. But I think, like, even before any of that happened, what we did see is that the decline of social media is substantial. Like, charities are, well, even before we get to charities, people aren't necessarily gathering on Facebook and X the way that they used to. There is a generational component to that, I think, but it's just not it's not where you may be finding people as you might have before. So as a matter of fact, like, we've seen, I think there's like a 80% drop off in traffic to referrals to new sites from both Facebook and X. And this was like pre the new management of X. So I don't think you can just attribute it to a leadership change. And then even Meta with Facebook is reporting 50% less views to Facebook posts and links. So the referrals and where people are going and congregating are declining, and they're not here anymore, or they may not be here anymore. And I think that's that's also supported by the fact that, we've seen TikTok and Instagram come up, and what medium they're using in terms of content, it feels very much more like a short form videos, right? So TikTok has taken a little bit of flack because they have a lot of shopping ads kind of mixed in. So that balance is off for a lot of users. But if you go to look at Instagram, it feels like an entertainment platform. So the mediums that Facebook and Twitter are using of just, kind of posts and, more bulleted types of interactions versus a short form video is a change that we're seeing. And in general, organizations then clearly are reducing their advertising spend, right? Like, you're going to put your dollars where you're going to find your people, and that's all changing. We also, can't neglect to talk about the toxicity of social media and where that might be impacting users and where they want to be. So there are things that, there's a lot of press out there. Social media has a lot of good around it. There are a lot of challenges with using it responsibly. And I think that's just causing a fair amount of people to just begin to move off of these more controversial platforms, especially Facebook and Twitter. And we also have noted, like, for things like X, where there is strong stance around climate change with how they're presenting themselves. You're seeing cohorts of people that are around causes leaving platforms because they don't, align with their beliefs and their values. So for charities specifically within 2024, as you look at your social media strategy, I think it is to begin to consider and understand where, like, are your demographic and your people still congregating where they might have been 2 years ago? There is an overall departure of users, and maybe in particular, if you're a cause-based organization with a set of users that may have really stayed on a platform, if they're leaving in cohorts. So while like social media is not over. It's still very much predominantly a part of where we find engagement and where we put content. I think there's an opportunity to look at the platforms that you're using and the type of content that you're producing, especially with the short form video being much more conducive, it seems today, for our attention spans and how we're used to consuming information. So we've covered off on the different ways of giving and changes that we're seeing around some of these older social media platforms. So now we're going to move to fundraising with generative AI. So, it's really hard, as I said in the intro, to get out of talking about anything tech or product wise without mentioning AI. But I was at an event a couple weeks ago with nonprofits here in the U.S., and we had a focus group on AI, and there was a fair number of organizations that said that they would never use it, and then we had a conversation about how they are actually using it all the time. We just don't think about it in that way anymore. So before we get into what is different about generative AI, just general artificial intelligence, we see it in predictive analytics. You're probably using it if you use tools like Grammarly, which I do to kind of help me clean up my writing. And the crux of that tool is to begin to learn like how you would talk, right? Or the type of style of conversation that you want to have. And it offers up suggestions. Even, predictive search in some level is working around some concepts of AI. But as we move into generative AI, it is much more powerful. It is, the most talked about tech of 2023 without a doubt. And what generative AI depends on is super fast processing of massive amounts of data with algorithms that are looking for patterns and features. And they use that information to produce lots of different types of things. The interaction with generative AI, the effective interaction comes with a lot of prompts, right? So you have to be kind of specific about how you want text to sound or how you want a picture to look like. And there's a lot of applications of generative AI. So you can use tools around crafting text. There's tools to help you create images, tools around audio and video. So much so, there's a little screenshot here, but someone has built a, aggregator directory for called There's an AI for that will kind of consolidate things because you actually have so many different options. So there is not a lack of tools out there. I have dabbled with a few of those, and I'll say that they takes a little bit of practice, but they're shockingly easy to use, at least to get some. You may not get the best type of content, but you'll get something. And then we start moving to like what can you actually do with generative AI, and maybe there are areas that you can explore using it on how to derive some benefits for your organizations in 2024. First off, on content, I think if you've played around with AI at all, and I'm sure you've heard it, there is there's not much I get out of it that I'm like, oh, I can turn around and run with this. And I don't necessarily think that that is a good thing to do. You always have to remember you're basically querying a bunch of, a giant warehouse of data, which, there are always questions around sourcing and kind of what is coming out of this. But it is on you to do not only the diligence of what you're producing, but also to personalize it. So I think we can all tell when things have been drafted and written that do not sound authentic, and you will find that authenticity, the voice of your organization or how you want to talk to your donors may not always come through. But what it does do is it provides a good boilerplate or a starting point. So like, I think when you're struggling with where do I begin, that's where I kind of find myself interacting more with AI to give me some ideas that I can then iterate off of. So I think using AI for content to see if that can kind of cut some of your creation cycle is it's a good opportunity to explore in 2024 if you haven't already. The second thing that we're seeing is AI and chatbots. So, chatbots are just that. It's a series of questions that anyone that's part of your organization landscape, whether it's a donor or a prospect, can ask a question and you get answers. So being able to use AI to improve the chatbot experience is a really big time saver, and can hopefully keep that connection with your prospect or with your donor. We have seen organizations integrate some of these chatbots with PayPal so that when you're in your fundraising donor process or donation process, there's help available, and you'll tend to keep them engaged and connected along the full donation experience. So that also is an option to consider. And the third option that we've seen is, AI and the generative AI can take the burden off of a lot of the more menial tasks. So I haven't delved into using AI for this as of now. I'm mostly been playing with it around helping me with think through better content or kind of creating a place for me to start. But there are organizations that have used AI to automate some tasks. So really a lot of the back-end tasks like managing donor databases, building spreadsheets, building models, like some of those things that just are time consuming, but they're, relatively easy to describe and get built. That is another thing that we're seeing, which, every charitable organization is dealing with capacity issues. So if there are opportunities to use AI to reduce some of the time that you need to run your organizations, it's always a welcome opportunity. So, we'll see, I think, throughout 2024. I don't think AI is not going away anytime soon. It's going to get deeper. There's going to be more engagement. So it's a good time if your organization hasn't already to begin to play with it. There are, I think, organizational decisions that need to be made around content and how much do we want to engage, and that I think varies. But I think getting familiar with what is out there and seeing, is this something that we could use to help improve our donor experience or our content strategy, it certainly is. It will help answer a lot of questions for you once you get in there and start using it. So now we're going to move on to our last trend, which is gaming for good. So I am not a gamer. I'll be the first one to say that, but I have been super intrigued by this concept of gaming and the activities I see on things like Twitch and the passion that comes out of this community. So it's not new, and I think we've seen a lot of charities benefit within the last couple of years of engaging with gaming for good. So we saw the British Heart Foundation, the Blue Cross, Health for Heroes. They've all, within the last few years, benefited from doing streaming fundraisers around gaming for good. And, we've seen the stats that the gaming industry is worth 7 billion alone in the UK, which is a crazy amount of money. And we saw last year that gaming for good went mainstream. So there is a initiative now called Gaming Without Borders, and it was a long series of invite-only tournaments taking place around the world where people could play from the comfort of their own homes. And it will bring, last year, it brought everyone together in Saudi Arabia to play for a prize purse that would all go to charity. That was, I think, about 8.2 million pounds, or around $10 million. I mean, just a tremendous amount of money. And, you know, people, gamers, using this as a way to support different causes. And if you're not a gamer like me, or if you do game, you can probably teach me a few things. But it is very easy to implement to some extent. Like, it's just a button that can show up as a gamer is gaming, and they stream on a live feed how they're playing the game. So this concept of I'm going to watch someone play a game, I think, is where I've still not got my head around. But I'm old, so whatever. But they have the ability to engage with, they have huge followings, and they have the ability to engage with their audiences, where they will donate for, a good game move, or if they get an extra life, or maybe they'll donate against a nemesis, what have you. But it is actually already part of how they work. The difference is now that you can begin to attribute these donations, or these money that's being given to these gamers for a charitable cause or towards a charity organization. So we saw a lot of organizations testing out the gaming world, and we believe that this year is the opportunity and the time for our charitable organizations to get involved. It is a relatively low lift. It is tried and tested. We know, and we've seen it work for charities, and it is a great opportunity to kick the tires on it and test it out and see what it can do for you. It gives you also an opportunity to diversify your revenue stream, your donation stream, which is always great. As we talked about, we're seeing changes coming out of the social media space, where maybe you would have expected higher attribution, and you need to start looking at alternative avenues. So, gaming is something that is really a great opportunity for you to begin to explore. And we're just going to see more of it in 2024, whereas before it felt kind of experimental. I think now, a few years back, within the last few years, we've just seen it as a mainstream, tested, supported donation revenue opportunity for organizations. And I think there's just one call out to make. So there is a difference between gaming and streaming. So you do have gamers that play games and they stream their activities. So streaming is kind of the mechanism of getting people involved with the game. But you can also do streaming that has nothing to do with gaming, right? So it's watching films, it's hosting a quiz. So you may have an opportunity, as you look at your fundraising strategy, to look at activities you can do around gaming, which would be streamed, as well as just activities that can happen over streaming to also help you raise funds that don't really involve a gaming platform. And, as I said, it's easy. Everyone has an internet connection. They have their consoles, they have their equipment, and you just really need a button, and it's something that kids can get involved in. The average gamer in the UK, I think the age is reported at 31. So while they may not necessarily be your core focus demographic, you do have an opportunity to start building, the donor for life, right? You're getting them at that age where you can begin to cultivate a longer term relationship. So I think, this is a great opportunity for you all to consider what inroads you can make. And maybe when we have some time at the end, I'd love to hear about anyone's experiences that have kind of explored gaming for good, and what they've found. So that's the webinar for today. We'll talk a little bit about looking forward, but the trends that we highlighted that we want to encourage you to look into for 2024 are, again, exploring the different types of giving with flexible and inverse giving. taking a closer look at your social media platforms and maybe ditching some of the older ones and exploring some of the newer ones. Um, and beginning to experiment and play around with AI and some of the new technologies that are out there. Use it for the lens of a couple of different things. Can it help you shorten your content life cycle? Is there an ability to kind of improve your donor experience with chatbots? And are there opportunities for you to shave off some of your administrative time with some of the repetitive tasks that we all need to do? And then lastly, gaming for good. So we really would encourage you to begin to explore this as a diversified opportunity stream and see, what you can bring to your organization. And so looking forward to the future, you know, there is, here in the US, especially, we are heading into an election year. And I think globally, it doesn't matter where you are, you need to tread cautiously around politics. So it is, it is, it is divided. They definitely, like, we see that, 50% of donors say they want charities to campaign for change, while 44% say they want charities to stay out of the politics. It's a very kind of you got to thread the needle here, I think we would say. So be mindful of kind of where you align your communications and activities between politics, causes, and kind of affecting for change. We have seen that the appetite for donations, it continues to be high. So that is something that has been nice to see, that while we've had some difficult years behind us, we are still seeing that 73% of donors plan to donate to charities within the next 3 months. So as we're starting January and 2024, it's a good opportunity to start thinking through and getting those activities lined up for the year. And we're still seeing the effects of the cost of living crisis. So while people's overall attitude of feeling not very positive might have plateaued, we have events that are happening all the time around us that feels precarious and can change at any moment. So I think remaining flexible and sensitive around fundraising is vital. There are some elements here around how does this work for providing flexible giving options to your donor base, as well as looking at the inverse giving idea here, where can you be transparent about the challenges that you're facing as an organization, because that also can be impactful. People want to support things that they resonate with. And then the last thing is, donors want clarity. It ties back to the first point about visibility and being visible with your challenges and transparent with your challenges as an organization, and being able to say, hey, donor, I see you and I see what you're going through. But also donors want to know where their money is going. And we've seen this particularly pronounced among the crisis in Israel and Gaza, that they want to know how their funds are being used. And I think, charities need to remember to be clear and transparent and open around all things, both their current state and their struggles and their challenges, and how funds are being used. Building trust and confidence with your supporters and among your base is the biggest thing that you can do to keep them engaged and coming back and around for a long time. So that is everything that we have for today. I really loved talking to you guys. I look forward to getting into some of the chat Q&A. Lisa, thanks for coming back. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share.
Yes, if you,
Yeah.
exactly. If
Yeah.
you'd like, or you can keep it on, or move it to the next slide. But thank you very,
yes,
very much.
the resources.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes.
Yes. Yes, we talked about a lot of things, and Charity Digital is awesome about having tons of resources for all of us to use. We've also added the .org Learning Center, which is PIR's content about all things around .org and support for mission-driven organizations. And I know that there was a webinar that was done. I know more coming from Charity Digital around AI and building your fundraising strategy. I'm sure Raquel dropped things in the chat as well, but we have a bunch of resources for you guys to continue to look at and explore.
Yes, and more importantly, all of that is free. So in order to access the resources on the Charity Digital website, all you need to do is register, but then everything can be accessed for free, as well as the recording of this webinar and the slides and all the other links we mentioned throughout the presentation. They'll be all available on the webinar page. So thank you very much, Vinita. And now let's dive straight into questions, because we have had quite a few. The first one from Wayne, most people donate to solve an issue, such as cancer, food poverty, etc. How would you encourage people to donate to a charity that didn't have an issue to solve, but provided services to learning disabled people, for example?
So if I understand the question, how would you encourage people to donate to services that don't tie back to an issue? Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. I'm happy to jump in. I don't know if you had
So
any
I guess
questions.
I hitting pause on this one, and this is a great question, and I'm kind of thinking through some use cases, but my first instinct, and I'll answer it with my first instinct, was to say, wouldn't every service tie back to an issue? So if you're talking specifically about learning disabled, the challenges for the learning for learning around a disabled population, for example, like is the issue around funding, right? That there's not enough funding available to support what should be like an equal opportunity
Equal
education
opportunity.
for,
Yeah.
yeah. So unless I'm sure there's nuances there, but I think the way I would answer that is to look at the services that you're providing and maybe flip it on its head a little bit to see, obviously you're providing the services because there is a need, and the
Mm-hmm.
need is coming from the lack of support in a community. And is that something that you would expect the government to do? Is it something that you would expect a school system to do? I think the issue might be in there, but Lisa, I'll let you take it as well, because that was my first instinct. I feel like
Yeah,
I did the answer a little bit, but that's where I'm landing, I think.
yeah, I like your answer, Vanita, and absolutely your cause. So supporting people with learning disabilities is a great cause. You're making sure that these people are, play their rightful part in society. They have access to, like you said, education, play, same opportunities as everyone else. So I think again, turning it over its head, and in mind, it's different from, food poverty or cancer, but it is a really, really great cause, and people would love to feel good about supporting a cause that is actually making the place a more inclusive one. So having perhaps that type of, we see that type of narrative, if possible, user-generated content. So highlighting how your services are impacting the lives of all of these people with learning disabilities. People would be more than happy to support a cause and feel good about supporting a cause that has such an impact on people's lives and families' lives as well, because it's not only these people with learning disabilities, but it's also their whole families. You know, taking benefits from that. So hopefully that has given you a little bit of information there to start. Yes, the messaging around your cause, which is extremely worthy. Moving on to the following question. So we are reading the questions in terms of upvote. So if there's any question that you'd like to be asked first, please feel free to upvote. Question from Axel on the point that was made about inverse giving. They've seen a few charities recently sharing the balance sheet or giving a breakdown of their cost and prompting supporters to help fill the gaps between the end of the financial year. Axel would be interested to get our thoughts on whether that's an effective tactic, especially in these challenging financial times.
So I guess I would say the audience of this, right? Like who are you sharing this with would be the question, probably question to the question. But that being said, if it's going to your, a public external audience about the gaps on funding, I mean, I do think that the transparency piece of it is important, right? So there's probably a balance here of how much do you want to share, but I do think that beginning to talk about the challenges that you're having, and because especially when you're looking to provide basic services, we have seen it resonate, and people will tend to give a little bit more to support it. And if you're saying, if you're talking about it in terms of closing the gap, and we need to close the gap because of all of these, things that have happened that are affecting our costs, I think there is a desire to support it. I see it in my local community around small businesses and, running into weather and people not going out to eat. And there are posts that come up that say, hey, like I'm a small business and I'm trying to pay my payroll, and we had days of snow. And if you're going to come out to eat, come here and don't go to, a chain restaurant. Right. So and it works because I go and I see people go and they kind of rally around to support.
And also more even also something very important is the probably not just sharing a balance sheet without any context, but always bring back the impact. So if people give whatever amount of money, whether that's a couple of pounds or hundred of pounds, what is it going to have as an impact on your cause? So is it going to enable to, I don't know, deliver 100 meals for beneficiaries? Is it going to be, funding, I don't know, 3 trips for young children with learning disabilities, etc. So always, I think, very important that there's a saying that numbers can numb. So I think it's also very important to bring it back to your cause. And okay, we need to fill the gap, we need to plug the gap, but what does it actually mean in actually impact terms? I think that will be the most important. Continuing, as we have quite a lot of questions, we have loads of people asking us about gaming for good and the first step for a small charity. I can perhaps start. We have loads of resources around gaming for good and on Charity Digital. I would, one of the first piece of advice would be to perhaps start looking at the different platforms, and then if you do have cats, I don't know how much social media channels you have, or if you have loads of followers, but perhaps put up a few, ask the questions, to your supporters. We are keen to, to get visible on Twitch or on Tiltify. Would some of you be interested in following our journey? And perhaps you could get some immediate responses through social media from some of your supporters or donors that actually, would be quite keen to follow the journey of your charity in the gaming for good world, sorry. And that's obviously an inexpensive way to start. The rest of the resources that we have show some examples of how charities have got into this world, have reached out to some potential, some gamers, and be part of big events and have managed to fund loads of money through these. But I think the most important is, see, members of your audience might already be familiar with gaming and might be big fans of gaming. So why not asking them and being very open, very candid? What if we were going down that route? Would you like to support us? Would you like to be involved? And hopefully you're going to get great answers. So hopefully that answer, Kat. I don't know if Vinita, you wanted to add
Yeah,
more to that.
just briefly, because I just want to address a couple of things that I'm seeing. So I'm not, the suggestion is to not go find a high profile ambassador to do a big gaming effort. Just a quick local story of mine. I am connected with a woman who does food insecurity for our community. And many of the people that are serving are high school students, right? They come and they do not have enough food to get them through the weekend. So there's a little shop where they can go get food. And once students recognize that this is like my peer, you're talking about a high school population that already games. And it was super easy to get it's fun for them, right? You get to stay out till 3 in the morning. The school will give the auditorium. You can put it up on the big screen. You have the Wi-Fi, they play, and it was super successful, right? Because that's a way that you can get some of the younger constituents involved to supporting causes that are local to them, especially if you're a small nonprofit, you want to test it out. Like, look at your high school students that are in your community. They want to get involved, and you're giving them a way to do it with gaming. Like, it kind of doesn't get better than that. And you don't need to go find the high profile gamer on Twitch. Start small, test it out.
Exactly. And more importantly, because they are, linked to your cause or aware of your cause, they'll be even more motivated and more likely to give it 100% to support your cause. So good luck with that. And as I'm conscious of time and we've got loads of questions, so thank you very much to everybody for joining. One last question from Sabina. I think there was a mention at some point in the presentation about an 80% drop off in social media. Where do you remember if the stats were UK based or global for that social media stat?
It was global. It was
It was
global.
global. Okay. Yeah. It was a global stat. We also have quite a lot of different articles around the different social media platforms. For instance, should your organization still stay on X Twitter, or should you go on TikTok and other things? So we'll make sure to include that in all the resources. Um, Unfortunately, this is all the questions we've got time for today. Don't worry though, because we will go through all of them and we'll make sure to answer them or to add some examples of articles to go into a little bit more, because there's loads of great questions. I always love it when we have a digital fundraising related topic, because it's great to see people's tips and experiences. Um, Again, the recording will be made available, the slides will be made available. So this is an opportunity to share with the rest of your team as well. Thank you very much, Peter, for your time, and well done for the presentation. Yeah, it was really brilliant to have you. And thank you, all of you, for joining us. Thank you. If you can leave, you normally, if you leave, once you leave, you're gonna be prompted to leave your feedback. It takes 1 minute, so it just enables us to continue to provide you with great content. If you are also interested, on the 8th of February is our next webinar, which will be on artificial intelligence, from Mora, on the securing your charity in the age of AI. So we will have all the information on our website. And in the meantime, we hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you again, Vinita, and see you all very soon.